I would like to call the I messed up already. November 8th, 2021 meeting of the Conservation and Forestry Committee to order. Do you have all of everyone's names and such,
Yes,
Mike,
I
for
do. Thank you.
attendees and such? Okay. I only brought 3 copies of the minutes for everyone to take a look at and see what we have for any corrections. You didn't print anything out, Andy, or have you taken a look at the minutes from before? Let me just send that down for you. I have taken a look at it already, I presume.
Yeah, but if
Or I
there's
can
any
come over
changes,
to you.
if there's any changes, then I'm sure I'll write them on this and then make them.
Yep, please do. I didn't find anything that, didn't read correctly as I remembered it, so.
Okay, good. I think you'll expect a motion to accept the minutes as...
Yeah, I was just gonna give him a second and, yeah.
Okay.
Make a motion to accept the minutes.
I would second.
Would you like to look at it?
All in favor?
All in favor? Thank you. See, I have my little cheat sheet here. It doesn't say all.
I got a little practice.
That's right, yeah, I need it too, just believe me. So, I'm looking at my little cheat sheet here for report of officers, but I presume we'll send right into, unfinished or old business. Does that make sense to you, Mike?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to read off a little of what we actually spoke of, and then I can move it forward with information that's come since the last meeting? Is that a good way to do it? Please do, jump right in.
Yeah, because this is actually into a new season, and I probably ought to, make sure that you got all your whoever's doing the minutes and this and that.
Right, that's part of it as well. Yeah,
You want to do that first before you get into the meeting, I would think.
we already have, that
Oh,
was
you
the
have?
last meeting.
Oh, the
Yeah.
last meeting, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
I
what
didn't
I'm
realize
saying,
you'd already
is
had that.
the re-election of officers with the quorum that we had last time was continued.
Okay,
And that was part of the minutes that
Okay.
are in that.
yeah. Sorry about that. Just
No,
making
by
sure
all
we're all
means,
good.
again, please do. If there's anything that you think is not kosher, just speak right up.
One of the things that I have been looking at and I'm unsure of is other committees in towns, in our town, have ordinances which kind of guide what they do and guide the process. And we do not have a forestry committee or a conservation committee ordinance. And I think that over time that the purpose of the committee's changed a bit.
Okay?
But I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about if we should have an ordinance, who creates the ordinance. Because it would help everyone, like new people that come in, understand exactly what the purpose of the committee is.
Okay?
And since there is no ordinance, it kind of makes it difficult at times, I think, to stay focused and stay on track as to what we should be doing.
And I'm not tenured enough to have known the creation since much before the joining of these two committees. However, we have brought forward, and I have got in my pile over here, some of the old documents from previous town meetings which had created and given a goal to this committee. So I don't know about its ordinance much before the joining of the Conservation and Forestry Committee, but we do have, goal statements and job directives. They are just old enough that, they're not brought up at each year's meeting or, again, any recommendations or how that can be more plain, by all means.
I just think that it should be considered and it should be updated because committees that I've served on in the past, like the road committee and warrant finance committee, have the ordinances in place. And it gives you everything right from the purpose of the committee, right down through the structure and organization of the meetings, all of it.
If I could chime in, I'm just the
No, please do,
liaison,
yeah.
so, I agree with Andy for the simple fact is, I mean, this committee here, typically you're talking about the town foresters and stuff like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, all the other committees do have an ordinance stating what your job description is and where your bounds are too. That way they don't go beyond what you should be doing. So at the end of the day, you know, anybody that gets on this committee knows exactly what their job goal is. And unfortunate part is, like you were saying, you've gone through back town meetings years and years. Most people don't know that, you know, wouldn't have that information because they're not gonna look back to that. But, you know, just for like, you know, if this committee wanted to come to the select board and, you know, wanted to proceed on to something that may be vague, at least it's structured so you know exactly what your job is. And that's why we've done it with other committees because, you know, say, I'm not gonna name any committees, but, you know, sometimes committees can go rogue and get off track a little bit. And by having an ordinance put in place, this is what your job is, especially when you've combined two committees like we have, which is recently. It may be time that we, you know, this committee could come up with some recommendations, start putting something together to what you think your job description would be, and then recommend it to the select board, and we'd be the ones that set, you know, would put that forward on the warrant anyways. I don't think it'd be a bad thing, and I think it's something that you could do while you're taking care of your other stuff and start creating that.
See, I think it would be a good idea because I know that in the past that, like I'm just looking at the road committee ordinance, for example, and it gives the duties, it defines clearly like what each member of the board or committee does. Like I know that back when before it was the Conservation or Forestry Committee, it was the Forestry Committee. And Steve, as the town forester, was a sitting member on the committee. Now that time has gone forward and people come and go, and almost by default, you've taken the chairman position of the committee, which is fine. But I think that if there was an ordinance in place, it would clearly define all that stuff. And since we're just kind of working off, you know, what we did in the past, I just think it would be much more transparent and much more, you know, efficient if we had an ordinance in place similar to the road committee or the warrant finance committee.
I don't think it would ever be a bad idea. My question would be, though, is if the committee was already created, then that is somewhat redundant, and that wouldn't necessarily be for this committee to decide what it does. It would be charged from above, would it not?
No, I mean, everything ends up going through the select board and then town meeting anyways. The road committee had a say in their ordinance, you know, they come up with their, you know, suggestions. And of course, anything that comes to the select board, you know, then we pick it apart and make sure that, you know, this is the way that we feel the town should be rolling. And then we put it forward to town meeting, and then at town meetings where, you know, it gets all icky, and if anyone has any issues, you can make your suggestions, but you have to have a start in place. And the committee itself would have, we would prefer getting, no, I'm not, and I don't wanna talk for the rest of the other selectmen, well, actually, I'm select one right now.
You're our liaison,
But I would
so.
think that we'd wanna hear your input before we went and did what we wanna do, you know, what we think should be done. So it'd make it more transparent for everybody, I think, at that point, starting down here and then up here.
Correct, but it has already been done once. So
But-
I'm just saying, yes, we can recreate it from
But the road
scratch.
committee also did too.
Okay.
The road committee was, when was that, Andy? That was back about '04 or something like that, I
I was
believe.
on the road committee many years ago, and we were part of the, you know, we were part of what shaped the road committee ordinance. It's been revised and updated along the way, but, same with warrant and finance. When I served on warrant and finance committee, we had an ordinance that we worked off from.
And that's been revised since.
Yes, same thing.
Well, again, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying that there's anything that it should not happen at all. I'm just trying to look back and say, if we have been working underneath of a charge to date, then what brings about the idea that it is ever changing?
Well, I think
Without-
because you
without,
combined the
causing-
two committees together, they were never combined before. When you combine them together, you've really created a new thing. And that's why a new ordinance would, I think, be beneficial, in the long run. But, I mean, that's up to this committee to figure out.
Well, I would just want to look back and make sure that we don't already have something like that, you know, this close to being written, or, you know what I'm saying? If this was, I want to say like 3 years ago, let's say, that the two committees, or 4 years ago that they were put together, that's not all that long ago. Chances are there was some language just previous to that that would have looked at this as well.
I don't remember any of
So if that's the case,
that.
then we can take a
I
look
don't
at it.
remember anything when we combined those back 3 years ago.
Again, I don't know that it exists. I just know that we did bring about the joining, and that would have been an obvious time that would be looked at,
Yeah.
right?
So
So,
what I would say is that, for instance, when you bring a new member on board and onto a committee, they should have something to go on so that they know exactly what the purpose of the committee is.
by all means, yeah.
Like when I came on last year, it was like, I thought that I had a pretty good, clear understanding of what we were doing, but there's nothing in writing that clearly defines what what our charge is. And now we have, Kelly is new, and that same material, if it was in existence, would be hugely to her benefit as a new member. And like I said, having served on committees in the past, that stuff was always readily available when somebody new came on, to see what you're kind of signing up for, I guess, too.
And we did that this year, last year, with, say, the finance committee. You know, they all got a piece of paper saying this is what your duties are, so they knew exactly to stay in this, on that one road. And, yeah.
So outside of the town forester, who has his point, and I'm not talking about as chair, but as town forester, is there any other specific roles that we're talking about? Like, other than, the secretary does this and chair does this? I don't know the other committees like Warren and Finance or Roads, just to say where you said each person within has a very specific job description. What would that look like here? I don't know what we would be
I think that
specified.
you look at the other two ordinances that are in existence, the road committee and the warrant finance committee, and use some of it as a template for some of your procedural things. But whereas we're a little bit unique in the fact that we have a town forester as part of the committee, we would want to clearly define that as well.
That makes sense.
Well, again, that part I understand, because that is a job description. I just didn't know if there is a job description for independent people within the committee outside of that point, is what I was asking.
Right, because thinking back, this is probably gonna go back like 10 years anyway, but when it was the forestry committee, you were kind of like retained with a $500 a year stipend. That's how far back I'm going.
Yeah.
$500 a year stipend for your, for consulting and your expertise on the wood
Or the
value.
wood part,
or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Or code and ordinances and stuff like that, but yeah.
But it has changed, moving forward, and I think, like I said, I just think it's a good idea to have that ordinance in place,
Right.
because these ordinances also tie into a lot of the town policies too, that are in existence, so I think it's important that, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I think it's something that we should do, moving forward, because 2 years from now, or next year, somebody else might, I didn't expect Wes to leave, But, people come and go, and to keep things on course, steady course, I think it would be very wise and it would serve the town well to create the ordinance.
By all means. So you're saying what would a good idea of the process of that be then? How has that worked within,
I think we ought to have a motion from the committee that says we're gonna explore
okay?
this avenue, and maybe under that motion, people would say, well, I'll go to the town and see what's on the books already. Somebody else may say, I'll go to other towns that have a forestry conservation committee and see what ordinances they have. I mean, do a little exploration that way. But I think a motion would be a prudent thing to do.
Okay?
It is a major direction.
No, by all means. So do we have a motion to that effect?
Make a motion that we explore, if that's not the right word, I'll amend it, but explore the creation of a forestry conservation committee ordinance.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Before you call the vote, is that word right, explore, or?
Again, I'm just trying to scribble down some stuff. I'd have to go back to make sure.
Well, let's get it right.
Okay.
I mean, what would be wrong with, saying that, the motion could be that we are gonna create an ordinance?
Well, the only problem is, we don't have one though? Are we sure we don't have one?
Well, and again, that was really all
We
my
wanna make
point.
sure we don't have one first.
Right.
It's not it's definitely not on the town website. Maybe it's something that we ought to, run by Jen before we start.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, I think,
We
yeah,
can
I'm just,
return-
that was my only point, is we're not recreating the wheel, we're not, recreating the wheel here. We do have something that is probably out there, at least in part. And if you're looking to try to amend and recreate and reformalize, then you need to start with what you have, not necessarily start.
So you can make you can make a motion to explore whether or not we have
Explore and research.
Research
The
a-
creation of the committee and its goals, or something like that.
yeah, and, something like that, yeah.
So that's all I wrote down, Mike, is explore and research the committee's creation and its goals. Anything to add to that?
I mean,
Before we bring-
yeah, because we're gonna find, in the end, it's like, it's gonna be, if there is something, it'll be something that we look at updating, so.
Yep.
I think
That gets the ball rolling, and this will evolve into, the formalized charge that you're looking for.
Because if you do find that we don't have anything really to go by, then that's when you can make the motion and say, okay, now we're gonna explore on creating actual ordinance.
next month when we meet, if we find there's nothing, then next month we have a motion to create.
Okay, so I just wanted the wording right on the,
Yep, again, all I wrote is to explore and research the committee's creation and its goals. And we could put something like toward a formalization. Formalizing goals for future members or something.
well, I think the goals would be incorporated into the ordinance. So, so what do you have again, Steve? Sorry to be
No, again, I just jotted down to explore and research the committee's creation and its goals, and then we can look farther.
We'll go with just that there for
Yeah,
now.
because it will go farther than that. and that's
Then, when
we're
you
starting.
find out that there is one or there isn't one, then you can move on to that at the next meeting.
Yeah, yeah. Would this,
What that's doing is allowing the committee to go out and get the information.
Just put it on an agenda item for next month's meeting.
So, Andy, you seconded it the first time?
Yes.
You want to second it?
I second it
As
again.
amended, or changed, or finalized, or?
Second the motion as amended.
Okay.
Now you can call a vote.
Okay,
And now you're looking for a vote.
yep.
Now you can call.
So now may I have a vote, please?
Oh, another vote.
Yeah. All those in favor?
All those in favor? Sorry.
You up? Yep. Having fun now. Having fun now.
So are we looking, I guess that's new business as much as it's old business, but, again, should we then go back to where we had been in the last meeting and try to move any of those goals and requests from last meeting forward as old business?
Well, I think we can go right through the minutes. We talked about the town farm lot. There's some things in there that I don't know if we want to deal with until we answer the question on the ordinance.
Well, that all has to do with whether or not we're doing anything in conjunction with Andy's request, Andy's,
Right.
well, like, for example, I did go back and get some of the town farm mapping printed out at larger scale. You know, for example, like we had spoke, I did get some information from Three Rivers Land Trust, Carl Davis, about Goat Hill were some of the questions that we had talked about.
You want to go through those?
Well, and again, so I just wanted to move those requests for information forward.
Right, right.
So again, what I had done is I had a request to print up the mapping for the two town forest properties to larger scale. I did not have anything digital on the Hebo property, but did print out large scale stand maps for the town farm property, town farm road property. We had a request to look into cleanup and what the structure was within the town to, you know, keep the Goat Hill property clean. We had seen some, you know, trash out there on trail sides and things like that. I gave a call to Carl Davis, who was kind of point on that, and his comment to me was that, that has generally been the charge of the Three Rivers Land Trust, as the lead management of that property is happening through the Three Rivers Land Trust, and they tend to be the one to schedule their cleanup days and things like that. And he made sure to say that anything that we would like to have passed along through this committee to make sure that we know anything that they're doing within the land trust on that property is brought to us as well, so we can generate more help and things like that for that lot.
So they schedule like a cleanup day and ask for
Cleanup days and
volunteers.
such like that. He said he didn't think there was anything scheduled until spring, but that he would just make sure that we knew anything that they were doing out there on the property for management or cleanup or anything like that.
Or extra work type.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly, yep. Have the selectmen come by any new appointee for Wes's slot? Yeah,
They're still looking, as far
Okay.
as I know. We announce it all the time.
yep.
Big shoes
So
to
you
fill, you
can-
know.
So
Excuse
you
me?
can make a note on
So
that as
big-
well, Mike?
big shoes to fill.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Very knowledgeable.
We had been looking to make an appointment and schedule a town farm road walk. Hadn't been able to get enough consensus to put together a time on that. Threw out a couple of dates and times. and didn't have enough, feedback through Deer Seed, excuse me, feedback to, have enough participation to make that happen before this meeting. So I'll continue to reach out and, request anything of anyone that has time to take a walk out there. I did forward a copy from the town to Kelly, our new member, along with the mapping, and she has reviewed the plan, so she does feel as though she can at least start to, discuss that, should that come up, that the business wouldn't be held up on her account. But that she is looking forward to being out on site as soon as possible.
Before the snow gets deep.
I did bring forward, I found somewhere in one of the older files that I had from 2021, a budget timeline, just to try to look at what we have for scheduling, like a yearly schedule, working backwards from town meeting. So should we decide to have something in front of the town for either town, farm, road, property management, or work days, or anything like that to bring in front of the town in a warrant article, that we're working backwards from a given point on that, and I did bring that as the schedule. I don't have the 2022 schedule, so if I can get that from Jen, I presume still, and it'll show everything from now to 2022 meeting.
Yep.
And we're just working back from that. So I did bring the 2021 budget line, which talks about in which month things occur, and in the order that they would occur for bringing warrant articles and ordinances and things like that.
Does our committee have any funds?
Yes, I don't know what the number is. We have $250 per year that has come through the town meeting for essentially publications and things like that, which is rarely used. So I don't know what the balance of that is at this point.
Is that something that?
I did just print up some maps from it, but that was.
Is that something we could have for the next meeting?
Sure.
Just so that we
Yeah.
all know if we have $2 in there or 2 million?
No, by all means.
We had 2 million, we know about it.
That's right, yeah, I would think so.
Somebody would know about it.
Right.
Somebody's going to Disney World.
Goes in, is gone at the end of the year, right?
I don't believe that rolls
Starts over
over. I don't believe that is one of the rollover.
What was that comment?
Say it doesn't build up, it just.
Rolls over.
Lapses?
I would
And your
guess.
comment was what?
I don't believe, I might be wrong, don't take me on, but I don't believe that's one of the articles that rolls over every year, but I can check on that.
Yep. Okay, so the budget timelines and ordinance timelines, the mapping has been printed out. That's really what I have in going through the minutes from last meeting. Does anyone else have any old business to tend to? Are we now open for new business? Do we have new business?
Well, I have a question on the implementation of the plan. If the town moves forward with implementing the forest management plan, how does that play out?
Specifically, meaning like what we had talked, where we last left from before COVID,
Right,
was we were discussing the adoption / implementation question of bringing the plan. The plan has been submitted to the town, the plan has been paid for. The question is what are we now going to do with it? And when we last met, and actually I think you were at that meeting as well, Dave, back in the day. The concept was selectmen were looking for this committee to have a recommendation brought forth to the selectmen on what to do with it. So it was kind of put back upon us, I guess, is probably the best way that I would recall it, in saying, you know, if it made it out of committee, so to speak, as request to adopt or request to implement. When COVID hit, we were trying to figure out what the verbiage of that recommendation would be, and that's where everything just hit the standstill with COVID.
As I recall, I mean, where the report itself ended was the town accepted it as a report.
Yes. I mean, accepted was, again, what's the definition of that?
Right.
It was
So the town
bought and
has
paid for,
The
but that
town
didn't
has
mean-
that document on file.
Yes.
Because they bought and paid for it.
Yep, yep,
Because we didn't make any motions or anything to accept
Right.
it. so-
correct, yep.
So I guess my question is, as far as implementing the plan, what does it look like when that plan is implemented? Like, let's say you went through the process of site walks, public input, and all of it. And the town said, okay, we're gonna implement the plan. Then what?
Well, that's up to us to decide. I don't really know how to answer that question. If it's been put back on the committee to recommend how that plan is moved forward and implemented, then I can't answer that without the committee's input. So I guess,
But you have the plan that the town already paid for.
Yeah.
We've all looked at and reviewed the plan.
yeah,
If it goes to a town vote and the town vote says, yes, implement the plan, where do you go from there?
well, I would see it as being that we continue on again with all the public input and the site walks and the meetings. And because the plan is a goals-oriented document and followed through then and brought about recommendations for practices to be implemented, then again, we are speaking of, do we do this now, that later? Is this what the committee deems is the best way to move forward with this portion of the goal on this particular stand of timber? Again, you come forth and say at that point, are we, again, I'm open to this discussion.
Well, I guess it depends.
Sooner or later, it's going to come to a point in which we are saying, we do want to do work or we don't want to do work as a committee, and it would be on this stand or that stand or whatever. And then specifically, as time would go by, obviously, work would happen on the ground, and it would have to be, the agent would then go forth and actually, you know, like I said, mark timber or put forth whatever that process would be as recommended by this committee,
Who oversees all that?
the committee.
Unless the town wants to hire a forester, or if Steve is retained by the town as the town forester, he would oversee that. And make sure that the work done on the property is going according to the implementation plan. So you have a management plan, which is broad, with all those subcategories in there: wildlife, recreation, historical areas, timber, and what do we want to do in each area of that lot. That's the implementation part of it. And it doesn't have to be, we're going to do
It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So
Right, it doesn't have to be done the first year. It could be, the implementation plan could have a timeline of 10 years. And, you know, the first year might be, how do we get more people out there? And then how do we allow those people to get out there and get back to their cars without getting lost? So, you know, do you put in trails? Do you, you know, highlight the wildlife areas, the historical areas there? And, you know, so that implementation plan is more specific, much more specific than a general management plan. So I think we can look at the general management plan and say, okay, what is really important? We go out there, we have the public input. What do we get from that public input that's really important out there? And then set up your implementation plan that way, and then present that to the Board of Selectmen and say, this is what we'd like to do over the next 5, 10 years, whatever the time frame, if we do set up a time frame. And they would say, yeah, this is great, or no, we don't want to do that, or, you know, clear cut the whole thing, or, you know, whatever. But I think as a committee, we can look at that. And if you want to break it down into each one of those goals, work on a goal, whether it's recreation, whether it's historical, whether it's timber management, whether it's timber improvement, wildlife improvement, habitat improvement, erosion control. I know there's erosion out there from the four-wheelers on the road. So, how do we set those priorities as a committee if we get some public input? And I think, Dave, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but we're kind of on the committee as part of that public input, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not that I wouldn't want to have walks out there that are open to the public to get more input, but, we can have that, but I think that's part of our charge. And if we have an ordinance that says that, then we can make those decisions and present it to the Board of Selectmen, and they can go from there.
Yeah, that's why too, like getting back to the whole concept of an ordinance, I think that we're almost putting the cart before the horse by not having the ordinance fully in place before we do a lot of this other work as far as implementing a plan.
Well, I think regardless of what the ordinance says, you have a big management plan here. And I think we can look at what's important out there. How do we want to at least have a discussion about the implementation of the plan? I think there's things that we can do prior to the adoption of an ordinance, if there isn't one. I don't think we're going to do anything that's going to be so far out in left field that the ordinance is going to prevent it.
Right.
The document's a recommendation of possibilities is the way to put it. And if even just looking at last year's or pre-COVID's timeline of the selectmen saying, put forth a recommendation from the committee to the selectmen, that in and of itself is a version of a charge, even if not written into the bylaw, so to speak, of what is the committee's charge previous to that. So in my mind, we have been given a charge to bring forth something about that property from committee to selectmen. And if we can do that congruently with the verbiage of what we're saying as part of the ordinance of the creation of the committee, then by all means. Again, there's nothing that's actually saying that, the adoption or implementation is a blanket anything coming out of this committee.
I think what I'm getting, and tell me if I'm wrong, Andy, I'm just trying to I think what I'm getting at, what Andy's asking is, after it's gone through the town, the selectmen and this, even if it gets voted on to go ahead and do it, who oversees the actual work being done? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so say the select board says, yeah, we're gonna put it on the town warrant, it gets voted on, then who oversees the work?
The committee, as I understand it.
Or you could delegate the town forester to do that. In other towns, that's what the town forester's role is.
And that's why, like Andy's saying, if there's an ordinance specifically explaining that's the process.
Yeah.
And then that would make it more,
Palatable.
I think it's pretty tough for the average Joe that's just sitting on this committee to oversee a timber harvest.
You're right, but there's other things that can be done out there that average committee members can do and have feelings about or opinions about on what is important out there. There's a resource that's, it's pretty cool.
I think that right now, just as a citizen, and I've spoken quite candidly about it before, is that I think the best possible thing for the town forest at this point in time is to leave it as it is. And part of that reasoning is because of the number of timber harvests that have happened in Acton in the last few years. Some of it's been pretty large scale and has had a significant impact on wildlife.
Yeah, and I don't.
It's also had a significant impact on recreation.
Right, right.
I've spent a fair amount of time in the Shapley Town Forest hunting and hiking.
Yeah.
And I've spent a fair amount of time in Acton's Town Forest. And I've seen it a lot more with, since COVID happened, a lot more people are looking for outdoor recreation than ever before. So to take a resource that's being utilized for recreation and changing it when a lot of other surrounding areas have been significantly impacted with timber harvest, I don't think it's the time to do it.
I think the misconception of a forest management plan is that it's only about timber harvesting, and it isn't. You know, that's one part of it.
Oh, and I totally understand that.
So,
But even doing forest management, if you go in there and start cutting anything, you're still disturbing the natural habitat. A lot of it's in natural resource protection, we know, because of the wetlands.
yeah.
I was up there 2 weeks ago, you know, watching the geese fly into the bog. We know that there are wetlands and historical spots out there. But getting back to, you know, the logging happening in Acton, I mean, Hebo-Hibo Road is a prime example. I mean, there's been logging trucks rolling out of there for months. The parcel next to the town forest up there was clear cut 5 or 6 years ago. Like a 75-acre plot, just cleared. You can't keep cutting all of these big areas and expect wildlife to keep shifting around. They're running out of areas. And that's why you see things like, stuff like posted on What's Up in Acton, a bear taking somebody's bird feeder down. That bear doesn't want the bird feeder, he's running out of resources.
Yeah. Well, it's easy, too.
It is easy, I'm for an easy meal myself, but, I just think that, you know, a lot of that should be taken into consideration. I mean, I'd like to see like a aerial view map of Acton and see how much of it's been cut in the last 5 years, and I think that if you looked at that in your decision-making process, you might think about postponing any significant work on the town forest.
Well, I think that there's ways to enhance wildlife habitat. There's ways to enhance recreation opportunities out there, whether it's just to go out and watch the geese land, that don't involve, you know, massive cuttings. But it may involve some cutting. You know, some of the town forests I've seen, they take an area that's dedicated to forest management, you know, timber management. How are we gonna raise trees there for added value? That's one section of the lot. It's a showcase. There's one across from Shaker Lake, I think it's Waterboro, maybe Alfred.
Alfred, actually.
Yeah. Is it the Perkins lot? So there's opportunities for that, but I think there's opportunities for the recreation, the wildlife, to enhance those, not just, there might be things that we can do out there that would enhance it, rather than just leave it the way it is I guess what I'm saying.
I think, well, I'm sorry about cutting you off. You know, looking at the town farm plot, I think the biggest goal that I see as just average Joe that drives by, and I know the area pretty well through there, and there's no access in there right now.
Right.
I mean, you can talk about timber harvesting all you want and stuff, and unfortunately, timber harvesting is why the road's washed out. So, but part of it anyways, but, you know, I think, I don't remember that being on the plan as actually, you know, that being a priority is, you know, making good access in it. And, you know, really, the town of Acton, you know, has the right to use and improve that road up through there because of their property in there. And,
Is it a discontinued road?
that's discontinued way back.
Yep.
And, but because of our land in there, the
Yeah,
town's property, we have an access through there.
Yeah.
And, I think that's something that this committee really ought to look at as, you know, maybe looking at how we're gonna create new access, because right now, the average Joe's not going up in there unless he's on a 4x4, you know,
No,
a four-wheeler or something like that.
My wife and I would like to hike up there, but we're not able to
Yeah.
hike in from the tar road all the way in.
No, and there's no parking access out on the road. I
Right.
mean, every year, you know, we have a couple hunters who park right over the intersection there, you know.
Well, I think the idea that I see behind all of this is that we have talked about some of the various goals that we could have and might have happen out there. But we do have, and this has got nothing to do with the timber harvest, or the timber harvest is a very small piece over off to the side, is if this committee, and like you said, Andy, goes back to the creation of the ordinance of what is the goal and the driving force behind what this committee does, is to have wise use of these properties and to help these properties toward goals. So I'm just saying to not do anything with it, whether it's because of access or because of a bog or because of this or because of that, is not necessarily a reason to lock it up and throw away the key, in my mind. So I'm not saying we should charge in there and do anything, but the concept is that this committee is helping to guide management of town forests, town lands. And by having this committee, we are saying that we are trying to do some things with town lands. So I just don't want to get stuck on the idea that, or have you think that this proposal is to go out there and do, and throw everything against the wall and go crazy out there. If this committee is trying to help to wisely use that parcel of property, that is the overarching goal of it, whether it includes this, that, or the other, not all of the above. So I wouldn't want to recommend and say that you don't look at the property for some possibilities of management because of a road, or because of a wetland, or because of any of it. You want to take all of those things as an asset or a detriment and say, here we have this land, how can we use it to help the town toward its goals? So if the town is deciding through town meeting and this committee that that property is to be used wisely, then we need to find what that is and do something toward that goal.
I guess,
If the concept is to say, there is bad work across the street or bad work across town, and by the way, a lot of those, several of those properties that you mentioned of hunting and hiking on are actually seeing timber harvesting too on some of the other town forests. I had been invited on actually doing some of that work on those town forests to write management plans for it for some of those towns. So the concept behind towns having an input on the wise use of these properties is really the goal, not saying, let's not do anything with it over here because of what's happening down the street. So if it doesn't go anywhere, by all means, for this reason or that reason or the other reason, then that's fine. But if this committee's goal is to try to wisely use these, then that's what our charge is in my mind, is to research that and try to move that forward. Not, again, not toward this goal or that goal or any of the goals, but
right,
that's what we're putting forth to the town.
but the other town forest down on Hebo Road, what have we done with that since it was cut?
Nothing, but does that prove your point or disprove your point?
No, I just think that before it's cut, it should have a defined plan, because when that's been cut and it's the same thing, I mean, you're not gonna be able to utilize it any differently than this one after it's cut.
Kind of get the same problem.
I'm confused as to what that's.
Can't access it.
I guess what I'm saying is the last town forest was cut when?
0102.
And at that time, like, what were the goals in mind for that property?
It's in the plan that I wrote in 98, 99 and submitted to the town in the same manner that this one was.
Because we had talked about going out there and doing like a site walk of that one that has already been done, to kind of get a feel for the goals that are outlined in the plan, to see what that looks like in real life, you know, years later as it regenerates.
Yep.
So I'm trying to just wrap my mind around, you know, we're gonna develop and implement this plan, which is a fluid plan, we can change it as we go. But if that same process happened before. I'd like to see what it looks like.
Sure, by all means. Again, at the time and this is what has happened in the past, and that's what brought this plan to town meeting and to this committee. At that time that happened, that was authorized directly through the selectmen. And that's why at this point in time, this one was then brought back for further input from this committee to be brought back to the selectmen. And that's where we are now, is just simply saying, the plan is written with recommendations, now what do we do with it? Any more discussion? I mean, this can go on and on and on, obviously, but.
Yeah, I just don't wanna see, I just don't wanna see this parcel, and I could be wrong in how I view it, but it seems like Hebo Road, for example. We have a town forest down there. It's surrounded by a ton of private landowners who have cut their properties off, and that's fine. If it's their land, they have every right to do it. And they can cut it heavily, selectively, however they wanna do it. But when you go in there and you do some of that heavier stuff and you know, improve the road for access, it also brings on another host of problems. It can bring on a host of, you know, damage by ATVs. It can bring on people down there dumping refrigerators and trash. So I look at sometimes, you know, that rough road access that stinks to get there. You'd like to get there, but you can't. But if everybody can get to a remote spot,
It's a benefit to a
get
certain.
a fair amount of that nonsense. I mean, it wasn't long ago that Acton was talking about the possibility of closing down this end of Hebo, and it was a big deal. Everybody talked about it, and the reason they wanted to close it was because it was too acceptable for the dishonest people wanting to get rid of a bunch of trash instead of taking it to the transfer station. So I think you have to be really careful when you start to plan this stuff out. Some of it looks good on paper, but in real life, it might not look so good once it's out there.
I don't think anybody can disagree with what could happen if you do something or if you don't do something.
Right.
Properties change if you don't do anything with them, they change in manners if you do. And that's, again, part of the education of deciding what you implement and what you don't.
Yeah, and I think pretty much when I was talking about like the road access, you know, just going off of what you were talking about, people being able to go up and using it. And, but, you know, you're right, anytime you open up something that's out in the back, you know, a lot of problems can happen from that too, so.
Like I'd love to see that road improved enough for there's a handicapped gentleman that parks down there quite often. I haven't seen him this year, but, you know, I talked to him last year and he'd love to have it good enough so that he could get up in there further.
Yeah, he's parking over Vanda Tooley's little spot there.
Yep.
But I don't mean to interrupt, but if that, for example, is a pro for you to say that better access is a good thing, then I don't want us to then immediately flip to the opposite side and say we can't do this because we can't do the other.
Consider all of it.
No, it is definitely the case. I'm just saying, if you believe that, so are you implying, this is just me trying to illustrate something, I'm not going anywhere. So if you're thinking that better access is a plus, then aren't you saying the same thing that has happened on the Hebo you are condoning? Or
No, I think that what you do is you sit down and you look at each point of view as you develop your plan as to what you're actually gonna do out there. And you look at the pros and cons of leaving it like it is, improving it, all of it. I mean, I think there's a lot to it. I mean, cause I kinda look at this committee, we're the stewards of the town-owned forests. And what we do is gonna impact, you know, our kids and the next generation. So I think it's just, you know, it's all part of the process, the planning process, I guess.
I just think that by definition of what you just said even, we are stewards of it. And to me, as a forester at least, a steward is someone who is trying to find a way to use the property wisely. It's up to us and the town to figure out whether that is a pro or a con, or a good goal or a bad goal. But to say that we are stewards, in my mind, already in and of itself says that we have a management responsibility of a certain extent. Not okay, we'll avoid everything out there in order to avoid doing something incorrectly. We're here, and we should, in my mind, try to find a way to do it well, as an example. So again, whether that can happen and the pros or the cons become too heavyweight one way or the other is for the town to decide, for sure. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, but I just lean a little more toward the idea that it's this committee's goal to try to find a way to use it wisely and have those things happen as a good example. And if we find that way, then we should.
But I think some of this stuff ought to overlap with the other existing town forest on Hebo that we should be utilizing and planning and working on that one at the same time. It's the same thing, it's just a different location.
Yep, I agree.
And to me, it doesn't seem like much has happened on that one either.
But again,
Other
is
than-
the fact that, is that a pro or a con? Because we talked about it being a good
not
thing, and
saying
we
it-
haven't touched it. In
Good
20
or
years.
bad, I'm just saying, you know, maybe the goals have changed since it was cut.
Well, and maybe what we really ought to know is see what was in that plan back in, what, 99?
I'll go back and look at the date, but yeah.
And see what was supposed
We
to
actually
be
pulled
done.
that out for one of the meetings.
Yep. No, again, I have it. I just didn't bring it with me. It's not like I write it and throw it.
Like I said, another good site walk would be to look at the plan and go out and look at it. What does it look like years after the plan?
Yep,
Just for an idea of that.
sure. I just don't want to have, in my opinion, would be that to continue to look at all of those things does not preclude the idea of the adoption of the plan. You can adopt the plan and not implement it, like we spoke in previous years. You can adopt the plan and pick and choose parts of it.
Well, I think, I can't speak for the town, but I would think that they paid for the plan. They've made the assumption that the goals that are in the plan are something that we ought to look at. So, how do we do that? And I think Andy's right, maybe we ought to look at if there is a town ordinance for this committee, so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot, 6 months down the road and find out that we shouldn't have been, we didn't have the right to do that, whatever it is out there. So,
Yeah, and that's why, like, when I was doing some of the research on the ordinance, it's like, you can do a lot of work for nothing if it doesn't align with the ordinance.
well, yeah.
Same thing when we talked before about whatever we implement on the town forest and whatever we so choose to do ought to overlap with some of the stuff that went into the comprehensive plan. And there is definitely, I mean, the comprehensive plan, it's not an exciting read from start to finish. But there is a lot of good information in there that relates to this that ought to be considered.
Right.
And again, when was that written?
Boy,
I've got a lot of that from Carl and Tom Cashin at home as well.
I mean, I'm just,
it was, I think the original one was back in the 90s.
Yeah.
But it has been updated.
Has it?
I believe.
Again, that would be, I can help go back and talk to those guys and try to recreate that as well, because that was information that was on the top of the minds of Wes and Carl and Bill Maloney and Tom Cashin, who were around at its creation at that time too.
yeah.
So their input and at least recollection, for whatever that's worth, would be helpful.
And I would assume that some of those goals in the comprehensive plan would align with the goals in your forest management plan.
Correct. Yep. And that had been where, and again, this is just going back to Carl as chair previously, when the plan was submitted to the town, that was the discussion and that was part of its goals creation within the plan was the comp plan at that time, and we did talk a little bit about this points toward that and this points toward the other type of thing. So again, I just am saying, I don't think that we are trying to recreate the wheel. That information is out there to a pretty good extent. It just needs to be brought forward to members that weren't privy to it at the time, that's all.
Seems to me that we have something to do for next month, and that's to research the existence of an ordinance, and then I think that might help guide us.
And the comp plan, again, goals, ordinance, yep.
On our next step of implementing the forest management plan.
Right.
I hate to do a bunch of work and submit it to the selectmen and then have somebody say, well, you can't do that. That's against the ordinance.
Well, whatever we do gets submitted anyway, right?
Right, I think that we'll know a lot right off the bat. If there's an ordinance in place, that would be awesome. Because then all we'd have to do is sit down as a committee and look at it and look at areas we might want to, suggest to update.
Right.
If there is no ordinance in place, then I would think that we would pull a couple of the other ones that do exist for templates,
Yeah,
plug in the generic stuff that we know is easy to fill in, and then, when it comes down to defining the mission of the committee and the responsibilities of the committee, that's where our discussion and work would begin.
yeah, yeah.
And like you were saying too, you can also see what the other towns in the surrounding area have for
Yes.
forestry committees and conservation and all that, and kind of combine them all with what we have for other committees in town already and with the surrounding towns forestry committee.
Like you said, I think Shapley would be a good one to look at, Alfred if they've got a good working forest.
That might be,
They do.
I don't know if that's town or state, I don't know.
We can find that out, that's not a,
Yeah.
yep.
I would think it'd be town run, each town's gonna have a different, ordinance on each
Yeah.
committee, I'm sure.
But that one that I was referring to, I don't know if that's a town-owned lot or a state-owned lot, I don't know.
Where is it
I think
exactly
it's,
again?
I think it's a
Mass.
town, I think it's town.
Near the Shaker,
Oh,
Is it on the same side as the Shaker?
all I've seen is the sign for the forest and then the sign for a bakery.
All right, I think I know where it is.
Yeah.
Now, what's the forest over there off, Mouse Lane? I believe that's a.
Well, that whole area over there, south of,
There's a big,
well, it's the whole Massabesic
Yes.
forest
Yeah,
over
yeah,
there as
yeah.
well, right?
Is that, that's a town forest?
No.
Nope, that's
Is that
actually
state?
federal.
That's-
Federal.
Oh, federal,
Yeah,
oh,
that's actually
big
federal.
time.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not gonna use their template.
No, I thought that was a town thing.
No, that's actually used, and foresters come over from the USDA in Durham, because the local headquarters of the Forest Service, US Forest Service, is in Durham.
Yeah,
So they come over and implement some of that stuff, and with help from some of the foresters for the White Mountain National Forest, because that's all federal US Department of Agriculture.
Yeah.
So this is the Massabesic Experimental Forest specifically.
experimental forest.
So they're doing a lot out there for, there's this disease, what does this type of cut do to help prevent this, and those sorts of things.
Yep.
So they are using federal foresters from the Durham office and the White Mountain National Forest, which has its bases up around Conway. They actually come down and like timbermark and put together these straight up scientific experiments and write papers and all that kind of jazz.
I'm learning something tonight.
So there's more happening out there with a lot more from above, so to speak, than you would think for, lowly Waterboro or Sanford. It comes right up into behind Estes Lake on the north side of Estes. So pretty much a lot of that stuff from north and west of Kennebunk, north of 111.
Yeah,
All the way back out toward Shaker Pond. A lot of that is federal. Yep.
Good.
So do we have direction here?
Well, I think you've already made the motion to explore it already.
Yeah.
Right,
So you're already on the right track.
do we need a second motion
No, no, no,
for
no,
anything
no,
other than
no,
that?
I'm just, instead of
Right.
going over this
rehashing,
again and
right.
again and again, this
Right.
is- I'm sorry, I'm
No,
assuming some of
again,
your
no,
responsibility.
by all means. I guess I'm just asking if anyone else has any new business to discuss or anything else on those same subjects before we,
Looking at the minutes, you've got the large-scale maps
yep.
and the Hebo-Hibo lot, did you make maps for that?
No, that is not digital. So all I still have of that is 8x10 hand-drawn maps. So I'm looking at that to try to see if I can piece together something digital overlaid with other things before I blow it up.
Can I get a copy of the lot?
Yep.
Of the map of the lot?
Well, again,
Hand-drawn is fine.
yep, no problem. Yep. No, again, the plan is digital, but the maps are still, at that point in time, are hand-drawn.
I
Yep.
understand completely. If I could have a photocopy of one of those, that'd
Not
be
a problem.
great.
Not a problem. Okay. So if we don't have any more new business, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you.
Oh, David.